Welcome to the Astrology Star Sisters Talk Over Tea, Jupiter Retrograde and Pluto Direct, October 2024. And my star sister today is Madam Simon joining me. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Liz.
We have a great topic to talk about today. Okay, to get a hold of Simon, her website is iconalchemy.com and my website is alightpath.com. And we always enjoy hearing from you. So the tea for Jupiter retrograde is a green, black, or white tea, and they have antioxidant properties. And herbal teas, be creative with a blend. You can mix it with a green, black, or white tea, or just mix a few herbal teas. We have rose hips, apricot, jasmine, lavender, vanilla, cherry, or orange, or you can do them separately. So we're going to talk about Jupiter. Jupiter is the biggest planet and the oldest planet, formed from dust and gases from the formation of the sun, and Jupiter has 95 moons. Jupiter spins fast on its axis. A day on Jupiter is 10 and a half hours compared to us. Jupiter is about growth, abundance, expansion, adventures, prosperity, higher education, long distance and foreign travel, religion, philosophy, and expands. The caution is overly optimistic, overindulgence, and overspending. Jupiter stations retrograde at 21 degrees of Gemini on October 9th and through February 4th, 2025 at 11 Gemini. Jupiter stays in Gemini from May 25th, 2024 to June 9th, 2025. Simon, would you like to add anything about Jupiter?
So I associate Jupiter with hope and optimism. Jupiter has a tendency to make whatever he touches bigger, for better or for worse. So that means that, let's say we've got Jupiter in aspect to the sun. That can certainly help us to show up and shine better, but it can also perhaps make us a little too big for our britches. Yeah, those are the main qualities I see with Jupiter. In synastry, which is relationship astrology, which is one of my specialties, Jupiter tends to, when we see Jupiter contacts between charts, there will be greater acceptance of each other. And so a lot of times when we meet somebody, we're just like, I just like that person. I don't know why. It's actually Jupiter.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, we're going to look at the Sabian symbol for the degree where Jupiter stations retrograde. And the Sabian symbols were channeled by spiritualist medium Elsie Wheeler in 1925 with the assistance of Mark Edmund Jones. They are a symbolic image for each degree of the zodiac. It's like a phrase or a saying. So the Sabian symbol for Jupiter stations retrograde is 22 degrees of Gemini, dancing couples in a harvest festival. The keynote is a wholesome enjoyment of organic process and emotional drives. We find ourselves in the village where men and women live in far greater harmony with natural and seasonal processes, giving free rein to their emotional instincts. The two poles of a wholesome society, the large industrial city and agricultural village, should be included. Likewise, the two poles of a healthy personality, mind, and natural emotions should be active. In stresses the values of rhythmic, healthful activity is a natural step for this leads to the often much needed process of bioenergetic rebuilding. So do you have any comment about that?
Well, as is the case with much of Rudyard's commentary on the Sabian symbols, it is definitely a product of his time, being the early 20th century. The notion that a large industrial city is a necessary element of a wholesome society is, it has a particular bias. Obviously, I think that there are plenty of societies that do not need large industrial cities, and given the impact of industrialization on climate, obviously, I'm in strong disagreement on this subject. But I do think that, there is this notion of that different parts of a society can make it better to have not just one perspective, and to perhaps not just block off, our minds or our emotions depending upon our bias.
And integrating different ways.
Sorry.
Integrating different ways and bringing balance and harmony to different aspects and ways of life, and even cultures, for that matter.
Kind of dislike the characterization of the agricultural village as being more about the emotions than the mind. Because I'm sorry, but doing good planting work and making a good harvest and coordinating that takes some mental acuity. Again, that may be just my bias, as I have South Node in Virgo, and Virgo is the harvest time, right, in northern hemisphere. So, and Virgo being Mercury ruled, I'm associating agriculture with applied mental acuity. But I do think, in terms of the Sabian symbol, this idea of perhaps focusing on what feels natural and what is in attune with our emotions, even as 22 Gemini is in a mental sign.
Yes.
So, don't forget the heart when you're focused on the head.
Well, and agriculture is just as important as industry, whether it's, to have your car that you need to get to work, or the clothes that you need to wear. So it's like they're equal. To me, they're equally important. One isn't better than the other.
Yeah, although I tend to think that one's food is the most important thing of all. I have a Venus in Capricorn, so yes, to me, the people who plant and grow your food and the people who cook your food are actually far more important than they're given credit for.
I agree. Okay, so tea for Pluto direct, green and black tea or oolong, they have antioxidant properties. And the herbal teas would be blueberry, peppermint, vanilla, ginger, peach, chamomile, and lavender. So it's like, there's lots of choices, but if you don't have any of those, create your own. Have fun with it. And would you like to talk about Pluto?
Oh boy, Pluto. So both Liz and I have Capricorn suns, and we both have been experiencing Pluto for a while. I am sure we're both eager for Pluto to finally leave our sign for good. But so it was discovered in 1930, got reclassified as a dwarf planet in 2006, which it's interesting, some folks look at that as a demotion. It was actually as a result of Eris being discovered, and Eris is of a big enough size. Pluto hasn't cleared Gravitationally, the area around it, which is one of the requirements for a planet to have cleared its orbit of other bodies. And there's enough other things floating around out there around Pluto that Pluto's classification had to be reconsidered, which doesn't make him any less mighty. And in the process, they discovered he's got 5 moons. Like I always knew of him only as having Charon. But we've learned a lot more about Pluto in recent years. So he's a planet of transformation, regeneration, death and rebirth, power, destruction, has an underworld quality to him, is lord of the underworld in myth, but also is associated with underworld activities. That includes things like organized crime. But as mentioned, since he's associated with power, it can also relate to government and institutions. Is also a planet of renewal, is a force for change. The caution would be that Pluto and Pluto's themes can be obsessive. There's a desire for power. We can see abuse. Shadow materials are associated with Pluto. Shadow behaviors can be withholding or isolating, controlling, unstable, stubborn. Pluto stationed retrograde at 2 degrees of Aquarius in May of this year. And that will end on October 11th. And Pluto stations direct at 29 degrees of Capricorn in 39 minutes. So this is that last final push through Capricorn before entering Aquarius, where Pluto's going to remain for the next 20 years. And then, Pluto won't return to Capricorn for another 200 and...
maybe 225 years or so.
I think it was 230 something, but
thereabouts. Yes, and Pluto will be out of Capricorn on November 19th to go into Aquarius for good. So I'm happy to leave my sign. Pluto will be leaving Capricorn, so that'll be nice. And I always tell people, I dare you to tell Pluto that he's been demoted to a dwarf planet. Because I'm not telling him.
Pluto's still being a small but mighty planet. Think of like little dogs. And some little dogs are just little yappy things, and they're, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to them. But some are really small but mighty. And I feel like that's Pluto.
That's a very good example. I like that. So, okay, and then the Sabian symbol for Pluto stationing direct is 30 Capricorn. A secret meaning of men responsible for executive decision in world affairs. The keynote is the power to assume responsibility for crucial choices arrived at after mature discussions with those who share this power. So the keyword would be executive power, and kind of a description is aware of the work of secret committees in the White House and at all levels of the government. The student of esoteric philosophy believes in the existence of what has been called an inner government, which has the power to direct or guide the evolution of our planet and of mankind. Obviously, the symbol can also refer to what occurs at the more ordinary level of business and politics. At any level, it refers to the highest form of social interaction. Do you want to say anything more about this symbol?
So this is Capricorn. Capricorn structure and hierarchy. Capricorn being ruled by Saturn is going to be concerned with structure, and also is oriented toward a sense of authority and mastery. And it's interesting having Rudyard talk about different levels of government, both this kind of, inner government versus the outer mundane government. And I think that if one is to be involved in government, one should be paying attention to that inner government. But I suspect that perhaps our current political landscape has been struggling with that notion of inner government for a little while. Hopefully we can get it back on track soon.
I agree. Thanks. Okay, so Jupiter stations retrograde on October 9th at 21 Gemini in 20 minutes at 12:05 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and that would be 3:05 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time also. And so it's circled there, Jupiter. So you can see, and it's in the 11th house, but getting pretty close to go in the 12th house on the West Coast chart. And here's the aspect key that for those of you, we talk about aspects and it gives more information, and you can download this off my website if you like. And the Jupiter stations retrograde, and now we're going to talk about the aspects and kind of what it might mean. So we have a water grand trine with Mars to trine to Saturn and Nessus, and that's trine to Venus, and then it trines back to Mars. So do you want to start with that one, Simon?
So that grand water trine, since Saturn is involved, right, the involvement of Saturn does indicate a certain amount of focus on emotional maturity. But with Nessus present, there is also perhaps an awareness of where we have felt perhaps a bit used and abused. Nessus energy it tends to highlight that kind of harshness, which connecting with Saturn, that's a little extra harsh. It is in water, and so in water that can maybe soften that a bit, but it also can suggest things like be aware of the potential for emotional manipulation. Saturn does tend to be pretty straightforward, but that conjunction with Nessus just does concern me a bit. Also, Mars is in Cancer, which is the sign of his fall. Venus is in Scorpio, which is Mars ruled and the sign of her detriment. So there's a lot of Marsiness here, but it's not an empowered Mars. It's not Mars where Mars is happiest. It's Mars kind of struggling to do Mars things because Mars is having to deal with emotions rather than just getting down to the action. And also concerned about protecting what is close to us and who we care about, our family, our tribe, our closest connections. And also is concerned with what's going to make us feel safe. And Venus in Scorpio is not typically feeling very safe. And so we can, be concerned about the power dynamics in our relationships. I think that's a really big factor with this trine. But also specifically, how are we addressing those kinds of dynamics in our relationships from the standpoint of how we feel, what are our emotional responses, what is our level of control over our own emotional responses, and then where must we assert good boundaries when it comes to potentially abusive behavior, whether that's from somebody else to us or whether we're recognizing that tendency in ourselves. I really feel like the longer that I live on this planet, the more that I recognize we all have the capacity to be really nice or really awful and everything in between. And so recognizing our own awful tendencies, it's not something for us to beat ourselves up about, but rather to say, okay, how do I address this? How do I address where I might tend to be, to abuse my own authority, to be harsh or unkind when it's not needed? Okay. So this water trine, I think, can be useful for helping us to recognize those things in ourselves. But there can also be some shady behavior. The yods that we see there, Jupiter sextiling Chiron and pointing to Venus, that's going to put pressure on our relationships from the standpoint of having sympathy for what has hurt us and hope for the healing process. But since Venus is not in the happiest of places, then that can make it a little more intense for our relationships and intense with regard to our desires to connect, our desires to have the good things in life. Vesta and Venus then take, kind of align together with a sextile and send that pressure back toward Chiron. So it's an interesting kind of overlapping set of yods there, focused on the healing process and focused on understanding both our own hurts and what is hurtful or harmful to others within our relationships. And then that T-square, again, this is like we're looking at all kinds of the same players involved here, right? All of these configurations overlap. And so we've got, Jupiter is still loosely square Saturn. And then is loosely squared to Vesta, who is opposed by Saturn and Nessus. So that can put a lot of focus on this process. Vesta increases our focus, and also reminds us to pay attention to what do we hold sacred, what really matters to us. And some of us may feel like we've got a little bit of a crisis of faith going on, since both Jupiter and Vesta can relate to what is sacred. And, they're at odds with each other. And then Vesta is staring down Saturn and Nessus. And, perhaps suggesting that in order for us to maintain what is sacred to us, in order for us to maintain the sacred flame within us, we need to back off perhaps from some of the more stern ways of showing authority and mastery.
I think it's a big opportunity to do work on our relationships with ourselves and with other people, and to create healthier boundaries, create new boundaries. It's just a big opportunity to make new choices and decisions and to grow. in all levels. Thanks. That was great. So Pluto stations direct on October 11th at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And in Seattle, also in the 11th house. In the 11th house is groups and friends and networking. So it's like to grow our businesses or disconnect with more people, perhaps.
And also with causes, you will see causes in the 11th house. The 11th house traditionally is considered to be the house of good fortune. And so it's a social house. It's one of those public facing houses. But it's interesting, I mean, Pluto does relate very much to power, and something I realized I didn't even mention when I was speaking about Pluto before. Pluto also relates to wealth. The notion of oligarchy, government by the wealthy, okay, or plutocracy, those things, wealth and power are governed by Pluto. And so when we see Pluto stationing direct in Capricorn, which is hierarchical and which is concerned with our material goals and our long-term goals, our long-term structures of life, and is here in this 11th house in Seattle in particular, then it suggests a need to pay attention to what is power doing in relation to your causes and your social connections, but also the actual material structures that affect that. How does the workings of the city of Seattle, for example, how does the metropolitan area handle things like taxes and budgets and policing and things that cement the current power structure. And if you want actual change, what are you going to have to do to address power imbalances and ways in which maybe things have stagnated or have gotten rotten? That's what Pluto shows, is where things are festering and in dire need of transformation.
Well, and I find it really interesting that the moon is so close to that Pluto stationing. And to me, that just, that women issues are front and center. Family, what do we need to sustain our families and nurture all of us? And it is in Aquarius, so I would say that there's some new ways of how we do things. What would you say?
I would say the moon in Aquarius there is very much related to the will of the people. What is the will of the people? And specifically, what is the will of the people regarding change? What is the will of the people regarding how can we build consensus and act on that? And where does that consensus need to shift?
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to look at the other aspects of the Pluto stationing direct, and we start out with an Earth grand trine. And the players involved in that are Uranus, Pluto, and the descendant vertex. And then we have a water grand trine with Mars, Venus, and the ascendant. And of course, this is a Seattle chart. So if we did a chart for another location, we wouldn't have the ascendant and the vertex and the descendant involved, but it still felt important to add it in today, in my opinion. So do you want to talk about the grand trines, Simon?
Well, I mean, they are specifically local. So it'll be interesting to see if they have any impact with regard to local mundane astrology. And that's where I would expect to see any kind of impact. I wouldn't expect to see this on a personal level, unless you happen to have personal planets at those degrees and maybe are especially involved in the local government or the local mundane.
Well, and that Earth grand trine has a mini grand trine with Pluto, Uranus, and they're both sextile to Neptune. So that kind of adds a little extra in there, in my opinion. And then,
that minor grand trine is, I feel like it has been a prominent configuration since the summer. And it, like, I feel like that is the undercurrent that I'm always being mindful of while I'm talking about the astrology of this autumn. I've been talking about it a fair amount with my Patreon people, and it's just it is such an impetus to change, and to specifically change with regard to what is our vision for the future, what are our beliefs that we are going to act on, not simply, oh yes, we have to make some practical changes. That would be the Pluto Uranus trine that is currently is loosening slightly, but is going to go back into a tighter orb once Uranus stations direct. But yeah, it's we really do need to be paying attention to what is the vision that we are using to make the changes that we are making long term for our world and our society. Neptune can be both really confusing, can be associated with misinformation, and in Pisces, it's not just misinformation, it's misinformation that grabs us by the heart. And at the same time, Neptune, it can be very spiritual and can be very compassionate. I do feel like Neptune's presence in that minor grand trine has a lot to do with why, when we're looking at the things that are going on in the world today, so many of us are getting really gripped emotionally. And there can be even a sense of exhaustion about it. It's like, it's just so big, so much. And Neptune, just like Jupiter, has like that expansive quality. Neptune dissolves boundaries. And being co-present with Saturn, of course, and there's that kind of tug of war between them, right? But it still boils down to this question of, what are we going to be making our decisions from? What place? Are we going to be making our decisions from a standpoint of hope? Or are we going to be making our decisions from a standpoint of fear? Hope, love, compassion, all of these kinds of higher spiritual principles that Neptune is concerned with, or fear, control, insecurity, this kind of stodginess that we can associate with Saturn, and resistance to change, right? We can associate that with Saturn as well. So those two co-present in Pisces have been kind of wrestling for our hearts, really, when it comes to what's going to guide our decisions as we move into the future. And that minor grand trine, with all three outer planets involved, says, well, you're going to have to make a decision. You're going to have to make some changes, and they're going to be big changes. They're not just something that like one individual decides. They are what does the group decide? What does the entire world decide?
And the water grand trine, even though it's loose, it's Mars and Venus are applying to Neptune in that also. So it's going to get tighter and tighter, even though it's on this day, it's pretty loose, but it's moving in that direction. So it's going to be active for another week or two.
And then we've got these T-squares, which are, again, a big part of the background energy. The one with Pholus and the nodes, that's actually been kind of going on for a while. We've been seeing that since, I think, August.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Pholus is interesting because so Pholus is one of the centaurs, and he was a Haruspex. He was a type of diviner. And I do feel a bit as though Pholus squaring the nodes, while it can show us some our hidden talents, can show us strengths that we didn't know we had before. Pholus also suggests that we can't get too predictive about the future, which I think is funny for us as astrologers sitting here talking about this, because too much trying to see behind the curtain may be distracting us. It's not that, obviously most of us are going to want to try to look before we leap in any particular direction. But if we get hung up on it, I feel like we can get stuck with that, especially when we're looking at Pholus in Capricorn, that Saturn-ruled sign. The T-square from Mars, with Mars at the release point of the opposition between the Sun and Juno and Chiron and Eris. This T-square, Mercury was in this position with Juno a short while ago. And now we've got the Sun stepping into this. And there's that tension of the awareness between, the Sun's social, the Sun is in Libra, and it has social concerns, especially being conjoining Juno relating to, the promises we make, the compromises, and the efforts that we make to uphold our social institutions, whether those are partnerships or groups that we're trying to hold together. Those don't stay together just by, kind of walking along together and not paying attention to things. We actually have to work at our relationships and at our social institutions. And Juno takes those seriously. Whereas Chiron hanging out with Eris is, the wise centaur teacher plus plus the rebel warrior woman. And they're both in Aries, which is Mars ruled. Remember, I said Mars is in his detriment right now, or in his fall. And Chiron and Eris have both been really showing us where we struggle with our own executive function, with our desire to do make the big bold moves, and have big adventures, and live up to the kind of young energy that we see emphasized so much in U.S. society in particular. that go-getter, achievement-oriented kind of culture that burns people out, that doesn't allow for a lot of rest, or that can make it difficult to engage in cooperative ventures. And Mars in Cancer is in a position where he's kind of got to cooperate, at least with, those closest to him. And he's trying to help us feel safe and to help us take care of those we care about. But Eris and Chiron are reminding us, hey, don't forget the ways in which the current social order has had a negative impact.
Right. Well, and I would say that change is coming, or there is changes, and we might not have a big plan, or we do have a plan, but it's for those that like everything planned out, it might be a little bit more challenging because those that kind of fly by the seat of their pants and adjust when they need to might use this energy a little bit easier. But I would say with the trines that you'll have what you need, or you'll have the help to make the changes that you need to make, whatever they might be. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And we have a couple of yods here. Uranus sextile Neptune pointing to Mercury. And the other yod is Jupiter sextile Chiron pointing to Venus. So you want to jump in?
So, of course, that Uranus Neptune sextile is part of that minor grand trine that I was just talking about. And pointing to Mercury, then it is putting some impetus upon Mercury to think about our visions for change. And of course, Uranus can sometimes be is very much unexpected change, not just the change that we're planning, right? But the big forces of change that we don't foresee, and how are we adapting to them? So this is that, again, that kind of transcendental, large scale, what's in the zeitgeist energy that that these outer planets represent, putting pressure on us as individuals to change our ideas, to think and to communicate in ways that are going to address power, specifically since we've got Mercury is heading into, he's heading into Scorpio. So it would be, how are we addressing our relationships before we start addressing power? So yeah, Mercury in Libra then is going to be concerned with what's fair, what's just. Okay, justice is going to be on our minds if we're looking at these big transcendental social forces having an impact on the personal level. And also, how do the things that are going on in the world around us affect our relationships? And how can we be more fair, more balanced? Are we concerned with equality or not? And how is that reflected in our relationships? The yod from Jupiter sextile Chiron to Venus then put some hope, some faith in that process of addressing our hurts and trying to heal. Again, there's an emphasis on relationship here because it's Venus, but it's relationships with regard to what are the power dynamics, what are our most intense desires, what are the ways in which we can get obsessive or compulsive in our behaviors? How are we perhaps finding ourselves being a little too much with our desires, going a little over the top, and maybe being even excessively self-indulgent? We can see that with Venus in Scorpio. So note that Venus is ruling that Mercury right now. So these issues of fairness in relationship, and these issues of power, these issues of where are we being excessive and where can we come to some measure of balance, are intertwined. Both of these yachts have that kind of overlapping quality going on, with one focused more of coming more from the big forces that we don't easily see the source of, versus the Jupiter sextile to Chiron, where we may have a better idea of what's going on and what's influencing us.
Well, that's great. And to me, Venus in Scorpio keeps reminding me, we've been talking a lot about relationships, and it could expose, or the secret of somebody having a secret affair with somebody, it could expose that. But it could also expose if somebody secretly admires you or likes you. We don't have secret admirers so much anymore, but there could be somebody that likes you, but they're afraid to say something, and maybe they'll just be empowered to tell you.
Also, I would suspect that some people will see financial concerns highlighted, since Venus does relate to wealth. And we've got all this background energy also from, the Plutonian, right? That Pluto stationing direct. And Pluto relates to wealth. And then Jupiter in the mix can expand whatever he touches. But then Chiron there can also suggest that there are these limitations that we need to address.
So do you have any takeaways to leave our audience with of how they can use this energy, or to get through it easier? Or
Jupiter stationing retrograde, a Jupiter retrograde has us potentially reconsidering what it is that we believe. So for some people, yes, that can correspond to maybe a crisis of faith, maybe some uncertainty about authority figures, uncertainty about government. Okay. And then with Pluto stationing direct, there can be revelations of what might make us distrust authority or government. But at the same time, it's important for us to, when we're experiencing the questions raised by these kinds of transits, it's really important for us to look at them not from a standpoint of fearfulness, but from the standpoint of, how can I make the best use of the energies that are being presented to me? How can I pay attention to these themes in ways that are going to expand my perspective and at the same time be helpful, not harmful? There's that medical injunction of first do no harm, and I think that's very much the case when we are looking at how are we able to work with these energies? How are we able to work with the quality of time that is being presented to us by these things? And first do no harm is, I think, most important in all of this.
Well, and when planets are stationing, I always feel like a week to 2 weeks around the dates that planets are stationing, especially the outer planets, that um, vibrationally it's like a big change. So it's like it can feel a little off. I track the earthquakes, and I usually track the 2.5s and above. And usually, about for the world, there's about 30 a day. So today I looked on there and there was over 200
Oh,
2.5s and above. And I just thought, well, that's good that the earth is releasing the energy underneath. That's very Plutonian to me. So I always ask it to release gently and easily. And some of the earthquakes, I kind of started looking at the depth, were pretty deep. So it's like, I don't even know if people would feel them when they're so deep. They might not even be felt. So, and they weren't giant ones, even though a couple of them were 4 and 5s, but it was just like the earth is moving. So in some respects, that's a good thing. But it kind of feels like the energy is really moving. And I think just breathe and be kind to yourself and others, and you'll have what it takes to get through it. It's like I always believe we're not dealt with more than what we can handle. So, and we have other people because we can see with the floods around the world, because it's flooding in Nepal, it's flooding in Thailand, it flooded in the Carolinas and Florida and Georgia, and people are just stepping in and helping left and right. I mean, there's still a lot to be done, but that's always nice. So, do you have anything else that you want to add?
well, you know that you mentioned with regard to earthquakes, the that kind of Plutonian action of being very deep, and Uranus in Taurus is very much seismic change.
Mhm.
And so that's, yes, there's the earth having these earthquakes and shifting, but there's also the earthquakes within our lives, the less literal ones and more figurative ones. Um, and so, yeah, that Plutonian Uranian impetus to change then is also magnified or expanded, I should say, by that minor grand trine with Neptune. And Neptune can be compassion. So let's pay attention to where we can exercise compassion for all the big changes that are going on in our lives and the lives of others. Um, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I have a quote. Transformation is an ongoing process that tends to appear ordinary, when in fact something extraordinary is taking place. And that's by Susie Ross. So come back and enjoy future episodes with Astrology Star Sisters. I do a monthly show with Justin. We have 3 topics: the full moon forecast, the monthly astrology forecast, and a Chiron asteroid series. Then the Astrology Star Sisters talk over tea. I do the dwarf planets with Sue Minahan. And with Madam Simon, our next topic is Saturn stations direct. And we've just been picking different topics as we go along. And then the decans with astrology and tarot, Joy Vernon. And then You're a Cup Full of Stars, which is with the fixed stars, is with Marcia Bouchard. And then I'm on Top Cosmos on September 29th at 1 p.m. And this is the wrong, no. Yeah, we're past September. So the next one will be, I think, the last Sunday in October. I'm sorry, I didn't change the slide. I have the wrong slide. But I think it's the last Sunday of October. And then here's Madam Simon's slide. And go ahead and talk about your slide, please.
Oh, so I can be found on Patreon, as well as on my own website, iconalchemy.com. On Patreon, I talk about ongoing astrological transits and create custom astrological art for my patrons. And I can, like Liz, I'm a consulting astrologer. So if you wish to schedule a consultation, please visit my website at iconalchemy.com.
And then I have a newsletter, a YouTube channel, and I also do consultations, and that's the information to get a hold of me. And then again, Simon's website is iconalchemy.com, and my website is alightpath.com. And thank you so much for joining me today, Madam Simon. I appreciate it. And we'll be back before you know it for a new episode. So goodbye for now.